Okay, it's about 4:05, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Maura Thompson. I am the interim director of the Downtown Development Authority. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us on this beautiful day. We know everyone has a lot going on right now, and we are really just super appreciative of your time. So we're here today to talk about the next round of people-friendly streets projects. As many of you might know, the DDA's mission is to undertake infrastructure projects to strengthen our downtown. And over the last several years, we have been meeting that mission through the first round of people-friendly streets projects, which the community helped us shape. And that is why we are right back here with you today. We know that your input is critical to the success of these projects. I'm joined today by my colleagues from the DDA and the city, and an entire team of experts that will be walking us through presentations and workshops over the next 3 days. Before I hand it over to one of those experts, I just want to go over a few housekeeping issues or items, I should say. So this presentation, audio visual problem here. This presentation will last about 45 minutes, and then we will have plenty of time for questions and answers. Your audio and video will be off, and we ask that you use the chat box to put questions in. And you can feel free to throw questions in there at any time, and the facilitator will read them at the end of the presentation. If by chance we have any issues with, the Zoom bombing thing or something, we will immediately move you into a waiting room, and then we'll move you back. So just kind of hang on if something like that happens to happen, which we don't anticipate. And then finally, I want to remind everybody that tomorrow we will have 2 interactive workshop sessions, one session at noon and one session at 4 o'clock. So if you are so inclined, we would love to see you back. And if you have the time, and spread the word to friends, because those sessions should be really good. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Oliver Kiley from Smith Group to get us started.
All right, hopefully that all came up correctly. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for coming out. My name is Oliver Kiley from Smith Group here in Ann Arbor. We've been working with the DDA on many of the people-friendly street projects over the past few years, and are fortunate to be working with them on this next round as well. I'm also joined by Ian Lockwood from Tool Design Group, and the two of us are going to be kind of tag teaming the bulk of this presentation. So as Maura said, about 45 minutes. We'll do a little bit of background and overview of the People-Friendly Streets program. Ian will take over in part 2 and really talk about how, as a community, we can align our values with infrastructure projects with an emphasis on safety, equity, and making place. And then part 3, a discussion around sort of what we're seeing in the continuing pandemic era that we're all in, kind of a recap of some of the Healthy Street projects from last year, and then looking ahead at the projects and the opportunities that are under consideration during this work session. A couple quick things. Maura at the DDA had mentioned a few of these already. About just if you have questions, you can type them into the chat box, and we'll go through those questions and answers at the end of the session. Okay, program overview. So the People-Friendly Streets program, what is this really all about? This is really about putting people at the center of our conversations and our ideas about how streets can be designed and how they can work, and that we really be honest about how we're engaging and understanding the needs of a very diverse population that have different needs, have different modes of travel that they tend to use, and wanting to design streets to be responsive to that. And there are a number of really important things that help shape the People-Friendly Streets process. One is in alignment with our values around safety, equity, and the resilience of our community. Another is to use defensible decision-making, that we use best practices at each step in the process, that we engage the public and our community stakeholders to help build knowledge, share ideas, build support, and understanding for the kinds of projects that the DDA is pursuing. It's very critical. And lastly, that we are serving vulnerable and marginalized populations, and that we're hearing from everybody, including those that often aren't part of the process. That's really critical to achieving those equity outcomes. Very big team of people that are on this DDA and on the city staff and on the consultant side that are participating in these workshops over the next few days. So if you have a chance to participate in the breakout sessions tomorrow that Maura mentioned, you'll have a chance to work more directly and speak more directly with all of these people. So a big team looking at this round of work. As far as past and current people-friendly streets projects, just a quick little recap of the last few years. One of the first was the 5th and Detroit Street project in the Carytown area over by Community High School. And this project really helped reshape and transform that area of Carytown, and to be responsive to the needs of people in that area. And it was predominantly looking at it from a safety lens, creating more public space for gathering, for activities, helping to support the businesses in the area. So that project has been very successful and really transformed that area of the downtown. The Huron Street project wrapped up construction last year as well, and really just kind of re-energized the street, made it feel like a much more safe and comfortable street to walk along with better lighting, a better sense of separation from the car traffic. And it's been interesting walking out there and just seeing how many more people have been walking along Huron Street, whereas they tried to bypass it, and most people tried to get away from it as fast as they could before. There's a couple of upcoming work items on that. The signal or that Hawk signal that's down by the YMCA at 3rd and Chapin. That's going to be upgraded to a full signalized intersection. And then we're also working with the RIDE to look at some possible transit stop improvements along Huron Street. Another people-friendly streets project, this was completed in 2019, which was the William Street Bikeway. And this was the Ann Arbor's first separated bikeway, and also one of the first separated two-way bikeways in Michigan. And this has been a successful project as well, and really showed what was possible in terms of making a low stress bike network that people are more comfortable using. Upcoming on this project, we are looking to work with the city and the DDA to make some tweaks and adjustments to this design to just make it work a little bit better and work a little bit smoother. So as is the case, there's lessons to be learned, and we can apply those lessons to making some improvements. And then the last of the current people-friendly streets projects is the First and Ashley Street project. Most of First Street completed construction last year, and the remainder of that and some construction on Ashley will be taking place this year. And the big elements of this project, in addition to a lot of infrastructure and water main work, was creation of a two-way bikeway on First Street, as well as eventually these roads will be converted from a one-way pair of streets into restored back to two-way travel. And again, this project was driven by, those safety and access values. So for part 2 of the presentation, we just want to talk through how as a community we can work to realize our values and our shared values in the community through infrastructure projects and through public investment. And we'll start with these 7 values that the DDA board approved in July of last year to be their kind of operating values for how they can make decisions, how they can plan and engineer and design projects, and even help assess the impacts of those projects. And these values are worth talking through. So it's the idea that our downtown streets need to be safe and comfortable and feel welcoming and inviting for all people, that they provide equitable and just access for all people to be able to get to and move through and use the downtown regardless of how they're traveling, of building an affordable and inclusive community and recognizing that there's opportunities to support greater affordability and inclusivity in our community, building resilience and having a more energy responsible downtown, reducing our carbon footprint, better managing stormwater, supporting local businesses and ensuring that we have a vibrant and thriving local economy, that projects are implemented in a responsible manner, that we're using public dollars and public resources wisely to make investments that really bring these benefits to the front and realize what all these projects can accomplish. And lastly, that we kind of celebrate streets as part of our public realm and part of our public space, and that there's a civic role that streets can play in making the downtown and in our community a place that we want to be in and live in and work in. And kind of informing these values were really three big initiatives at the citywide level around building resilience and about building equity in our community. And that relates to the affordable housing initiatives, Ann Arbor's A to Zero, their carbon action plan, and then the ongoing work to complete the city's transportation master plan towards Vision Zero. And so each of these is a really critical component in how we build a more complete and resilient and equitable community. So our infrastructure projects have an opportunity to help support affordable housing initiatives. And we've been working with the Ann Arbor Housing Commission to analyze city-owned properties, particularly those in the downtown where there's an opportunity to build more affordable housing in the downtown area. We've been looking at how our street projects can support more non-motorized means of travel or use of mass transit and reduce carbon emissions related to vehicle emissions and help work towards greater carbon neutrality. And lastly, the Transportation Master Plan takes a very strong focus on prioritizing safety and of achieving a Vision Zero objective. And Ian will talk more about that in a minute. But I just want to highlight that all three of these initiatives really kind of go together to help transform our community and to make it a more equitable and resilient place. And infrastructure plays a critical role in that. So the DDA sees itself, sees this opportunity to pursue infrastructure projects as a economic development for all approach by being able to provide more safe and equitable access for people to access jobs, economic opportunities, goods and services, supporting a diverse population, improving the resilience of our community by having more flexible and adaptable streets. The pandemic has certainly been testing that. And then lastly, of creating more inclusive public spaces. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ian Lockwood at Tool Design Group.
Thank you, Oliver. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for attending. This is a pleasure to be part of something like this. These are some photographs of Ann Arbor, and just after World War II, there was a major change in how we moved. We went away from walking and transit towards more of a motor vehicle future, and that's been the way we've been moving forward for several decades. And now it's time to rethink that and go to a more kind of inclusive, equitable future regarding housing, climate change, inclusive transportation policy. So it's kind of a values-driven direction that we're looking at right now. And I just want to start with a little personal story. I kind of grew up on my bicycle as a little kid. I rode my bike to elementary school, middle school, and in high school. In high school, I got my first road bike, and that changed everything for me. My world expanded, and I was riding my bike down a street and got hit by that SUV, and he didn't see me. And fortunately, I survived. And about 6 months later, I'm riding down another street and got hit by a bus. And that was a awakening for me. I just realized that I was invisible out there on my bike. This was back in the 70s. And so eventually I went to university, and I still rode a bike. And that on the bottom right, you can see my bike. It's the white track bike, and I was riding track at the time. But I would ride that bike to school, and I didn't have a lock, so I just left it at the back of the classroom. And I'm doing my undergrad and my graduate work, and all the transportation classes I took, nobody mentioned the word bicycle, and I used that to get everywhere. And so I felt invisible by my profession as well. And when I got out into consulting, the world kind of revolved around motorists and not people like me. I still felt invisible. My father, who used a wheelchair, the world was not designed around him either. Anybody with any sort of impairment, low income people, pretty well invisible to the profession. And so I really applaud the direction this is going with creating much more inclusive cities. And those three initiatives that Oliver went over are super cool. And I'm really glad you're doing them comprehensively and together because they're mutually supportive. I just want to go way back in time to a point in our history where people thought that the planets revolved around the Earth and the sun revolved around the Earth. And people tried to predict the orbits of the planets and the sun and never could quite get it. And no matter how complicated the models were, there was always errors and problems, very frustrating. Then finally, somebody figured out the sun was actually in the center of the solar system, and then predicting the orbits became relatively straightforward and things made sense. And in our world, in transportation planning and city planning, for the last several decades, everything in the public realm revolved around cars and trucks. And it's complicated, and there's error, and there's problems, and there's health issues, safety issues, sprawl issues, development patterns, changing market issues, energy issues. Lots of issues with that. But where the city and the DDA is going is a more human-centric model, where the people are in the middle. People of all kinds, like myself on a bike, or like my father and other people, and everything starts to make sense when you put people in the center of your solar system. So that's a really healthy thing. So Oliver went over the shared values, and it's through these lenses, these overlap of these lenses, that we can create these people-friendly streets. And I just want to start with the safety and comfort part. And this is a clear priority in your policy. And I just want to go over the types of safety. The first is statistical safety, and this is about not being in danger, low probability of getting injured or seriously injured or killed. And this is through best practices. And then there's comfort, which is the feeling of safety. And this is really important for how people make decisions. One of your policies is to reduce vehicle miles traveled. And to do that, people have to be willing to walk. So they need to be comfortable when they're walking. Parents need to be comfortable that their children can walk to school safely. People who use their bicycles want to be comfortable while using their bike on the street. And Oliver went over a bunch of projects that you're doing to help with that. So comfort and safety are both very important. Now, when we design streets, we have this sort of legal safety. We need to make sure that we don't create streets that are undefendable in court to reduce our liability. And the normal inclination is just to kind of just follow the guidelines. But so many streets that we design in cities, or have been designed in cities, are not particularly safe. I think 40,000 odd people get killed every year on the streets, and hundreds of thousands get injured right across the country. And they're certainly not comfortable. And so what we need to do is design streets that meet standards and also are safe and comfortable. And that's what we're talking about here. When Barbara McCann coined the term complete streets in 2005, what she intended was that streets be comfortably designed for the people using the streets. And so that included all the motorized modes, plus the pedestrian, cyclists, kids, people in wheelchairs, and these are the mobile groups. And increasingly today, we want streets to support the static users of the street, the institutions, the homes, the recreation areas, businesses and that kind of thing. And the green and the red groups on that cartoon, those are the vulnerable users, and the streets really need to help support that to create a great street and a great city. The other really nice thing about your policy direction is this idea of Vision Zero. And what it says is that nobody should die or be seriously injured on your streets. And the idea is to change the designs of streets and change behaviors such that fatalities and serious injuries are eliminated by 2025. So that's a really important goal to be trying to achieve. And when you break it down, Vision Zero It says some pretty obvious things, that mobility for all different types of people, regardless of their age and ability level, they should be able to move around to access what they need to live. That crashes are preventable. However, humans make mistakes, and we need to recognize that those mistakes should not result in a death sentence or a serious injury. And that's really the essence of Vision Zero. And part of what you're doing is changing the default speed limit to 25 miles an hour, which will help dramatically. And if you look at these statistics, by going from 30 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour, if you hit a pedestrian, instead of half of them getting killed, only about a third of them will get killed. However, if you want to get to zero by 2025, maybe we want to look at perhaps 20 miles an hour. And if you go to 20 miles an hour, then only 5% of the pedestrians getting hit would be killed. So that would get closer to your goal of zero. So just as an idea, you might want to think about going to 20 miles an hour. Now, London is doing that. They have 75 times more people. Your city is about 5 or 6 miles wide. The main part of London is about 15 miles wide. So a bigger city, but they're going to 20 miles an hour. You can see in the green area. And if you look at the size of Ann Arbor, it's much smaller. And so, maybe 20 miles an hour would be appropriate here as well. So the idea is just to consider going to 20 miles an hour as your default speed, since you're a smaller city with less people. And the other part of Vision Zero is that it is supported by slower speeds. Slower speeds, lots of good things happen with slower speeds. It's not just health and the economy, but from a safety and comfort perspective. And you've got lots of lines in your policy on this page, on the next page of your policy summary, that speak to slower speeds. So I would just like to point out that it's not speeding, it's actually speed. And to bring those speeds down through better design speeds and targeting slower speeds, you can achieve a lot of really good outcomes in your city economically, socially, equitably, with those slower speeds. Even on the major streets, you've got a whole list of things you can do on your streets to get drivers to drive at slower and safer speeds. And because it's such a small city, this has a very small effect on travel time. So you get lots of benefits with very few disbenefits. So I would just like to conclude that by saying, if you can reduce your speeds on your streets, the big ones and the little ones, that's probably one of the most important things you can do to create a equitable public realm where everybody can participate. Another thing you're doing, which is super exciting, is reducing vehicle miles traveled. You have a policy in place to reduce what's in short called VMT, vehicle miles traveled, by at least 50% by 2030 to meet your environmental goals. And that's not just important for the environment and for safety, but it's also important for health, because as we reduce our VMT, more people can walk, they can ride their bicycles, they can take public transport, they can move closer to where they work, so their trips are shorter. There's all kinds of ways to reduce VMT that benefit the city and everyone living within the city. Now, lowering VMT is necessary to make great cities. In fact, the best cities in the world reduce their vehicle miles traveled while improving their economies and growing their populations and this kind of thing. But lowering VMT is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You can see in these photographs that this city has low VMT, but it's probably not the most vibrant place to live. So there's more to making great cities than just lowering VMT. And as shown in the previous picture, part of that is vibrancy and actually attracting people who want to be there. So in cities, we want lots of work trips and recreation trips and cultural trips and educational trips. We want all these trips to come into the city to make a really great, vibrant place. But if with more trips comes more traffic, unless a lot of that increase in traffic is made up because those trips are being made on foot, by bike, by transit, or shorter car trips. So we really want those modal splits, which is the percentage of trips made by automobile to go down and the percentages of other trips to go up. And if you can do that, then you can reduce your vehicle miles traveled for the whole city, and per capita. Now, the other part of this equation is to reduce the average trip length. A very powerful idea, which is built into your policy direction. And that's about increasing land use mixes and densities so that things that people need are close at hand. They're proximate to what they need. Increasing connectivity with the network, restoring two-way operations on one-way streets. These are the sorts of things that you can do to reduce trip lengths. And so these are 4 measures of effectiveness, which working together help you make really good land use decisions and transportation decisions. And there's a really nice policy statement that goes with this. There's lots of examples of how to go about changing these metrics. And at the top this is right out of your policy: reducing VMT, changing the percentage of trips made by automobile, increasing vibrancy, making it a successful and vibrant place, and reducing the average trip lengths, bringing people together for that 20-minute or 15-minute community. So these metrics include all kinds of land use dimensions and all kinds of transportation dimensions and other things like incentives and taxation and that kind of thing, to create an integrated metric for making good planning decisions. And this is baked into your policy decision. What used to happen predominantly was we worried about peak hour automobile accommodation, which is called levels of service. And what it did was, unless cars were flowing really easily during peak hour, you weren't allowed to develop, which encouraged developers to develop out of town, which created car dependency and sprawl. The other problem with the sort of level of service type thinking, if you wanted to remove some space from motorists to do a transit project or some other multimodal project or some environmental project, then level of service became an obstacle to that kind of progressive thinking. And level of service induced longer trip lengths, contributed to the sort of the car dependency problems that we're trying to deal with as a country now. And it takes a lot of land and energy and money to keep that sort of system going, which is just unsustainable. And of course, it results in typically faster speeds and lower safety outcomes. So it was fairly dangerous. And at the base of it, levels of service for motorists during peak hours is really an operational metric. And we shouldn't throw it out, but we should use it for what it's really good at things like signal timing and that kind of thing, and using planning metrics like the 4 ones at the top of this diagram for planning decisions. And you have developed these, 7 attributes of a really great place: safe, comfortable, and these values really align well with that universal planning equation up top. Equity, just about everything there speaks to equity, which is something that you can support by changing your modal splits in your average trip lengths. Affordability and equity really go together because we're not spending so much money on infrastructure. We're spending much more responsibly and intelligently, creating a much more resilient place and for the environment, for health and other aspects of resilience. And like we talked about, vibrancy is a key thing. Lowering VMT is not enough on its own. We need an active, thriving local economy, and everything in your policy helps do that. It's the right thing to do, and you've seen by the designs already that needle is being moved. And I'd like to focus on this one a little bit about how streets are part of the public realm, and it's really civic space. So I'm going to go into that a little more depth with this idea called path as place. And a path is any sort of road or street or conduit or trail that people move along, and the place is the geography in which they're moving through, whether it's a district or a downtown or the city as a whole. And the key is that when you're on a path, the key is the experience. We want the experience for everyone using the streets and public realm in Ann Arbor to have a positive experience. And that makes better streets, better places, better neighborhoods, and ultimately a better city and higher quality of life. Now, sometimes the path and the place are the same thing. Like on Main Street, The main street is the place where you go to get a meal, go to a show, meet your friends, but it's also a path where you walk along, or you ride your bike along, or you drive along. So the path and the place are the same thing. And then in a park, for example, a path through the park is part of the park, or a street in the downtown helps support the downtown. So it's just a part of the place. And then sometimes a path is integral to the place. For example, a parkway. A parkway through an old Olmsted Park or something like that, it's not a road with a park on each side. The parkway is actually part of the park and provides park experiences. So when you're driving through the landscape, you can enjoy the landscape and the views, and it moves you physically and emotionally through the landscape, and you can enjoy the changes in the landscape and scenery as you go through your park experience along the parkway. A key thought with pathless places: paths can be equal to their places, but never more important than the place. And this is really important, so that we don't create barriers and other sorts of unfortunate consequences when the path functions are overly emphasized. So next slide. And so paths should never dominate their places. They should be designed sensitively so that they support the place, and so that the path function and the place functions can coexist in harmony. And everywhere you go, where you feel comfortable on the streets, you sense that design sensitivity. So one of the things about streets is that the street is a public space, and pathless place gives kind of legitimacy to that idea. It gives importance to the static users, supporting what's on the sides of the place to create those relationships across the streets, along the views, and it provides rigor for designers and planners, so that when we design our paths, we don't diminish the place, but instead we actually enhance the place. And it gives us all, whether you're a transportation engineer or a planner or urban designer, or you own a business or you live in the city, a common purpose to improve the paths, to better support the place, and better support the different populations that live in the place. And at the end of the day, we get a more equitable and more successful city. And so all of these values that you've come up with are related to this equation, which the best cities use to increase their vibrancy and their populations while reducing their car dependency. So you're clearly on the right track. Ann Arbor is not the biggest city in the world. It's about 5 or 6 miles across, so not a bad bike ride. So a lot of things should be in biking distance and walking distance within your city. You have come up with a policy for a 20-minute neighborhood, and the idea is that everything you need routinely on a daily and weekly basis is in about a 20-minute walk. And you can see you've already achieved that a lot with things like parks and schools. You need a little more work on grocery stores and retail, but you're almost there, and very encouraging. So maybe we should raise the bar a little bit. So Paris, for example, is going with a 15-minute neighborhood, and that, if you go from 15 minutes to 20 minutes, it encompasses 78% more land. And so by going with 15 minutes, it helps you plan your land uses, so just to make things even that much more convenient for people to walk and to ride their bikes and that kind of thing, which would really help Ann Arbor. Mobility in the past, when I first started, it was just the movement of people and goods, and the focus was on movement. And the assumption was faster and farther and greater numbers was progress. And we never even questioned why people were moving. We just said, hey, look at all those people moving. Let's help them move even more. And today we understand that that actually led to a lot of problems. And so we have a better definition now for mobility. And it has to do with the people, the population's capabilities and strategies to move in order to access what they need. And movement is purposeful, and there's different types of people who have to move, whether it's people with disabilities or people with different income levels. And They're moving in order to access what they need, and what they need to live is about land use, isn't it? So these are the reasons why people move: to go to work, to shop, to visit people, to go to church, to socialize, these sorts of things. And so if we can bring these things together in the city, then people don't have to move as much, and that actually increases their mobility. Hello, mixed land use and density reduced my average weekend trip length by about 85%. So this guy's got everything he needs within about 3 feet. And so it kind of says, if we can plan our city so that everything is close at hand, then we don't have to move around and we have a much more efficient city. So mobility is an integrated idea of transportation and land use working together to reward proximity and more efficient and effective exchange. The reason we even have cities, why did cities get invented 6,500 years ago? It was actually to bring people together to advance efficient and effective exchange of labor and goods and entertainment and social contact, justice, defense, education, all these things come together in cities. And it was to reduce trip length. It's actually reduced VMT. That's why cities were invented. And the land use purpose was to concentrate the components of civic life together, to create those 10-minute, 15-minute, 20-minute neighborhoods. And we have developed a litmus test over time. Does the change reward the short trip or the transit trip? And when you're ever faced with a complicated planning issue, whether it's transportation or land use, just ask yourself that litmus test question. Does the change, whatever it is, reward the short trip and the transit trip? And if the answer is yes, chances are it's a good idea. And if you look at this map of Richmond, Virginia this is just after World War II, so that's 70 years ago. You see all those black lines, those are the trolley routes, which lead you to that big thick black line in the middle, which is the heart of the downtown on Broadway. And just about everybody in the city was in a short walk of where they needed to go or a short walk to the transit. So this litmus test was followed to the T in Ann Arbor, and in Richmond and in Ann Arbor and in Detroit and in New York and all these places up until the end of World War II. And after that, we started to deviate from that when we got into the car mode. And so traditionally, up to probably just after World War II, value was a function of proximity. The closer you were to downtown, the more valuable the land. And what we were taught in school, when I went to school 30 years ago or so, was that value is a function of travel time. So our professors were teaching us to speed up traffic, to try and make it go fast. And one of the professors said, your job is to speed up traffic. And unfortunately, that didn't have the benefit of 6,500 years of evolution. And it was a new idea and an untested idea. And when it got put into practice in American cities, what it did was it didn't spread out the value like the theory said. It actually devalued the core and exported the value to the edges. And you saw a lot of cities where their inner cities declined, and the suburbs were the recipients of the benefits of those faster roads. And those roads that got sped up became barriers in the community, splitting up neighborhoods and that kind of thing. And so now we've learned that doesn't work. And now we're starting to slow down the streets, make people-friendly streets, and investment in people are now coming back to the city. Now, the idea of going fast is appealing to the individual. Like if you were asked anybody, would you rather get to work faster rather than slower? Even if it's just a couple of minutes, they'll say, yeah, I'd rather get there faster, which is rational and your self-interest. So isn't it rational and in everyone's self-interest if everyone can go faster? So isn't it rational that you make the whole city go faster? The trouble with that is that it changes things. If everything stayed the same, it would be fine, but it doesn't change. It doesn't stay the same. As we sped up the roads, our downtowns declined and malls were invented. As we sped up them, the malls got replaced by big boxes, and we got bad health outcomes. We got bad land use outcomes. We became car dependent. The danger went up. So there's a lot of these problems that were created, and it's called a tragedy of the commons, where what's in one's self-interest and rational scaled up to society does damage. And And in, I mean, if you take courses of public administration, that's called bad public policy. And so did a lot of damage to the city. So we're doing our best to correct that these days. So I just want to point out that in the policy, there's these two words, moving efficiently. And in the past, that what thought was progress was faster, less travel time, emphasis on levels of service for motorists during peak hours. And it led to energy hungry, land hungry outcomes. And what we mean by moving efficiently now is resource efficient, land efficient, increasing access, multimodalism, shortening distances so that we have proximity, all the sorts of things that are supported through your policy. So just an example, we're just going to go to South Bend, Indiana and see what they did. This is their downtown just after World War II. You can see the very nice intact fabric of buildings down their streets. And what they did was they rewarded speed. And so they sped up their roads, they one-wayed them. And just like so many cities, they exported their value from the downtown to the suburbs and created barrier effects and unwalkable, inequitable outcomes. And what happened here is you can see probably half the buildings or so were torn down and made into surface parking lots. So it had a really devastating effect on the economy, social connectedness, and this is the main street. It's a 4-lane, one-way state road. And this is the sister street in the other direction. It's 4 lanes, one way along the waterfront. And you can see it's really not comfortable to walk along. The sidewalks are right next to moving traffic and you got those giant light poles there. It's just a hostile place to walk along, or it's very difficult to cross. It's not comfortable and it's not safe. So the city had a huge public outreach effort through a collaborative process and came up with a set of values that we applied to the redesign of the streets. And we literally just redrew what the streets ought to be like to fulfill the community values. And that's the drawing. And so we started implementing that. And so this is the before picture. The next one's the after picture. And it went from a 4-lane, one-way street to a 2-way, 2-lane street with separated bike facilities, trees, walking. And we'll look at the waterfront street. That went from this car conduit into a nice place with 2-way streets, separated bike facility, walking, nice street trees. And look on the left, we got investment going on here. So because of the changes we made to the streets, it attracted investment, jobs, housing, people, restaurants. The downtown became a much more livable, friendly, equitable place. And this was such a turnaround because of the sort of values. It was called their Smart Streets Initiative. This is value-based change to the city, that it propelled Mayor Pete Buttigieg into this kind of the national spotlight. And then he got involved in the Democratic Party and he wanted to run for president, but now he's the Secretary of Transportation for the country. And I think he learned a lot of his basic core principles through what he led in South Bend here. This is one of the streets that goes along the waterfront, that 4-lane, one-way street. And right in front of this old theater, we're proposing to rip out all that pavement, which it's already down to 2 lanes. But what we want to do eventually is change it into this, what's called a shared space, where it's this curbless environment where you can close the streets and have big celebrations in the parks and that kind of thing if you want. Here's some we've built around the country. And the nice thing is they're just equitable flush spaces in all kinds of geographies and climates. This one is in front of a basketball arena. And so during the day, when there's nothing going on in the arena, it also operates as a normal street. But at night, you can turn it into a plaza like that and have pre-function events out there, and no one's tripping over curbs. So it's really nice if you have a mobility impairment. Now, this is a university where we did their streets completely flush, and you can see that fellow in the student in the wheelchair, and he can cross the street just like any other student now. He lives in those residences, and so he can get to the bookstore and so forth just like anybody else. Now, this is a shared space in Sweden, and just look at the pedestrians and cyclists going all over the place. There's no signals, there's no crosswalks. It's just a space that people use. And it used to be this, and on the top, this highly controlled, highly engineered intersection with traffic signals, crosswalks, countdown signals. The engineer told everyone when they could drive, when they got a green light, how fast they could go. And it was resulting in bad outcomes. It wasn't a nice place. There was a lot of crashes. It just wasn't working. So they just stripped out all of that sort of conventional thinking and created this shared space, which is the plaza on the bottom. And you can, there it is again. It's a major bus route. And it actually takes less time to get through here in your car than it did before, because you're not sitting at a red light. And it's easier to walk and bike, and the collisions is almost vanished, and the businesses do work very well. And you can see the art on the far left. So there's a lot of community expression in this space. And this is what it looks like on the ground. And some people say that, well, people in Europe don't like to speed. And well, yeah, that I think is a Lamborghini, and people like to go fast if they can. But the design of the street, and this is what Oliver was talking about, this kind of responsible design. The design says you should go slowly, and people go slowly in their cars respectfully, and just through human interaction. Those old gentlemen approaching the Lamborghini are perfectly comfortable, walking along with their arms behind their back or in their pockets. So it's a very comfortable space, and we're also very concerned about people who can't see. So there's tactile guides built into the pavement so people can find their way around regardless of their ability level. This is in London, England. It's Exhibition Road, highly used street where a lot of the museums are. And it's just a nice space to be. And I can imagine this on several streets in Ann Arbor in the long run. So getting back to this city that we were saying that VMT is necessary but insufficient. So these are all before pictures. And so we worked with the community, learned their values, and with them collaboratively redesign their spaces. And now all of these streets and spaces are beautiful, valued, occupied. The economy is going nicely. And so now people can find everything they need in their little downtown, and they don't have to go out to the bypass to get stuff. So it's much more convenient. This lady who's on the right there, she was planning on getting married, and she was walking down Main Street with the city manager, asking him where the nicest venue is where she could get married. And then she just stopped in the street and said, I think I'd like to get married right here. And because the street is so beautiful that she said, this is where I want to get married. So one evening they shut the street to traffic, and she got married right there on Main Street. And these are the sorts of human connections and experiences that we'd like to see more of on streets and in cities. And this is the square at the end of the street. It's really just a parking lot. The only nice thing in it is that old courthouse. And there's the Texas Department of Transportation had this one-way pair of streets going around the edges of this public space. And so we worked with them and the businesses and the city, and we redesigned the space so that the streets are now two-way. They're all flush. There's no vertical curbs, and it's all made out of brick. And this is what it looks like. So you can park in any one of these parking spaces, and if you have a mobility impairment, you can get around without having to find a curb ramp. So it's a much more equitable space. You can go there for your picnics with your family. There's a large farmers market every weekend there, one of the best in Texas. There's lots of different places to set up stages for different scales of entertainment. This is one of the bigger events at Cinco de Mayo. Just thousands of people come, and because the streets are flush, you can close them to traffic and expand the square to building face, and having this great public space where people can come and celebrate. This was a monument that the vets community had put in the middle of the parking lot, and they didn't have anywhere else to put it. And the vets community was very active there, and so we worked with them on where to put it in the new square. So we took him away during the construction. Then when we brought him back, we gave him a really nice home on the corner, one of the corners. And today, you know, the vets have a very dignified place to have their memorial. And they were very excited about this whole thing, and they raised almost $1 million to build this new vets memorial. And on those walls, there are the names of every service member from the whole county that ever served in the county. And all the flags of all the different services are there, and they all focus, you notice they were curved, they all focus onto the American flag in the middle of the square. So a lot of symbolism built into the design of the space. Also, this space has places for folks to just sit and relax and meet their friends. There's places for the kids to go and have fun. Little kids, we did a splash pad right at the end of Main Street near the ice cream store. And so they have a riot there. Lots of things to do. So you can just go down and find things to do. Meet your friends at any age. There's art around the square, big art pieces, art like this to quell the sound of the air conditioners for the courthouse, and little bits of art. And then because we made such a great civic space out of the public realm, investment came. So this old decades-long empty building turned into a really nice restaurant with 3 homes on top. So a lot of investment followed. And then we had some fun with it too. That you should always try and have some whimsy built into your city, just because. And so we made the restrooms. There's 2 of them. We made them out of mirrors, and so they reflect exactly the historic square. And the kids have a lot of fun with the mirrors. But when you're in the restroom, it's kind of really interesting because they're one-way mirrors and you can see out. And so this immediately got the interest of the press, and so these little restrooms became tourist attractions on their own because it's just a fun thing. And then this is the footprint of the Walmart and the Walmart site plan imprinted over that square that you just saw. And the floor plate of the building is larger than that entire square that we looked at. So you can do a lot of really nice things in your public realm in relatively small spaces and really change things for the better in your city. And this Walmart helped kill the downtown originally when it was built on the highway bypass. This is the sort of heartwarming things for me when you look at a scene like this and you just circle the folks who you can tell have some sort of mobility impairment. They can participate in this entire space just like everybody else. So it's a very equitable space. There's not a vertical element in it. And these are what we call free-range children. They can come downtown unsupervised, and they've been doing it for over a decade since we built the project. And before they never did. Kids were sequestered in their homes, and now they can come and socialize and explore and do what kids really ought to be doing. And so it's really heartwarming sort of scenes that you'll see of all age groups enjoying the downtown. And so I just want to say congrats on your direction in terms of safety and equity and reducing speeds, your 20-minute city, all these sorts of things that you're doing will help Ann Arbor, get to the next level. And I just suggest thinking a little bit about perhaps that litmus test for all changes, the 4 planning metrics that are related to VMT and support all of your values. The idea of maybe a 15-minute city instead of 20, just to raise the bar a little bit. And I just want to warn, be very careful about that sort of pro-speed thinking, because it can undermine a lot of the other policy objectives that you have. So way to go. I'm very excited about the direction that Ann Arbor is taking, and rah, keep going. It's really great. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Ian. I'm going to switch back over and just round out our presentation today with just a few additional slides. Whoop, there we go. So we just want to touch base on kind of what we're seeing over the last year or so as we've been dealing with the pandemic and what that might mean and how that might inform our design work moving forward. We're continuing to see, increased demand for biking and walking space, increased pressure on curbside uses to support business activity. Lots of discussion and enthusiasm around the commercial street closures last year that let us open up our streets so that businesses could spill out into the roads for dining and retailing, even though the pandemic was going on. And that was a really instrumental tool to help keep businesses going. So these are things that we want to be thinking about in the design of streets as we move forward. Another critical one is thinking about traffic patterns and understanding that, traffic volumes and, our VMT actually went down quite a bit during the pandemic. But what that looks like moving forward is something that has a lot of uncertainty around it. So lots of people are speculating, what the time frame is for when, and even if traffic volumes will ever get back up to their prior peaks that they were before the pandemic. Major businesses and institutions across the country are already preparing for shifts, long-term shifts in work patterns of how people are commuting. I think this pandemic era has been sort of a shift and a shock to the system, if you will, of how people are moving, how people are working, and we don't know exactly how this is going to shake out long term. So it's important that we be flexible and adaptable. Another key aspect of the work that we've been looking at in Ann Arbor is really that focus on safety and achieving Vision Zero. We know by looking at past crash data, where those vulnerable user crashes or fatal and serious injury crashes are occurring, and we can apply best practices towards reducing those. But it's also not just reducing the quantitative aspect of safety, but it's also that comfort piece as well, which I'll speak to in a moment. And then from an equity standpoint, while the People Friendly Streets project is really looking at and focused on the downtown, it's critical that we understand who needs to get downtown, why people are coming downtown, what modes of transportation are available to them, recognizing that not everybody has access to a personal vehicle, yet they also may not have the income to be able to live in the downtown environment, or maybe their job is. So how do we make sure that our work works as a system to support mobility choices for people, regardless of their means? And I mentioned the comfort piece a second ago. And, when you look at bicycles, this is a good example where building out conventional bike lanes, which the city has done made tremendous strides on over the past many years. But a lot of those conventional bike lanes really just target, the 7 and 5% of strong and fearless or really confident cyclists on the left. And we're missing out really on the majority of people that would be comfortable biking on major roads, but they really want something that's more separated and more protected. And there's research and surveying that's shown that, when you build it, the people will come. But you need to have a network and have enough of it that that becomes an enticing and comfortable as well as safe option for people. So our work's also been looking at the bicycle network downtown and understanding where there are gaps and where we can build lower stress and more comfortable connections for people. Last year, kind of going right out of the work related to bikeways and lower stress connections, the pandemic did provide an opportunity to look at pilot testing some changes in the downtown in order to assess them and evaluate how they performed. And really the driver for these was the COVID-19 response to provide safer and wider areas for biking and walking downtown, so that people could be physically distanced and all of that. But these pilot projects were implemented using the DDA's core values and really with that focus on safety, equity, and access. And through these pilot projects, we were able to help inform potential future designs along these corridors. So there were 5 different pilot projects that were rolled out last year. Miller Catherine Bikeway, the Division Street Bikeway, a section of South Main down to Packard, a section of bikeway over by State Street, and then bicycle improvements down in the Packard Triangle area. And what we found when we surveyed residents, when we went out and collected traffic data, collected bike volumes and bike counts, and looked at speeds, was that these pilot projects did meet the goals. They improved safety, they improved access for people. We had nearly 700 respondents to the survey, and 2/3 of them had used at least one of the pilot projects. And among those users, they were overwhelmingly supported and seen as a positive impact for improving people's mobility, safety, and sense of comfort in the downtown environment. They did also highlight areas where there were some challenges or some tricky spots and some concerns. And those became issues in locations that we can look at in future design work So that can really help inform that process. So just the last few slides looking ahead. As when we started off the presentation, we talked through prior DDA people-friendly street projects. So we touched on those 5 projects that are shown here in green. And for all of the remaining downtown streets, we kind of put all of these in a big grid and looked at how each of these streets related back to those core values that we've been talking about to understand, what are the opportunities for change along these corridors, to improve safety and comfort, to improve access to biking or to transit services. We looked at where these corridors sit relative to publicly owned properties and potential affordable housing sites, and whether or not there were infrastructure improvements like water main, sanitary sewer, things like that. Infrastructure improvements that could be done as part of a street project to support affordable housing. All of those play into the resiliency and sustainability equation of trying to make it more affordable for people to live downtown while also expanding people's mobility choices and making it easier to get around and less car dependent. Opportunities for creating more vibrant spaces and then aligning with other city projects. And so really 3 projects jumped out as we went through that analysis. That was the Division Street Bikeway, the Miller-Catherine Bikeway project, a section of 4th Ave around the Blake Transit Center and the old Y lot, which is a potential affordable housing site. And then in addition to that, the DDA is pursuing improvements along State Street and portions of North Main in a project in coordination with or collaboration with the city of Ann Arbor that's also doing utility upgrades. And then, as the last kind of piece of what we're looking at in terms of future work through these workshops are also those other streets, so the orange dotted streets. We want to understand from the public and through our community engagement what opportunities and ideas people have to make those streets also live up to and meet our values. So kind of timeline in terms of these workshops and what's next for these different projects. The public and stakeholder engagement work, this is really critical that we get input and have discussion with a broad range of stakeholders. There's 2 projects that are scheduled to be moving forward relatively quickly. One is the Division Street Bikeway and the other are the improvements on State Street. So through these workshops, we'll be soliciting input from the public and other stakeholders on the design of these. And then those other streets, we really want to understand, what of those projects might be prioritized, what kinds of scope items might be included in those projects so that we can make a recommendation to the DDA board about how to pursue those projects in the next round of people-friendly streets. So to that end, we're kind of finishing out day 1 here. Tomorrow is really the big roll up the sleeves day, where we have 2 breakout sessions from 12 to 2, and then again from 4 to 6 p.m., where we'll have breakouts on each of these 5 different projects that are listed here, where we will have plans, kind of a big, large virtual whiteboard or virtual canvas with plan drawings, cross sections, imagery of examples and precedents from other places, so that we can have kind of a facilitated small group conversations about what people would like to see and how these design ideas might be refined. And then on day 3, at the end of the day, we'll be reporting out in a public presentation as well, kind of pulling together everything that we've heard over the last few days and sharing that back out with the community. Beyond this presentation and the engagement sessions I mentioned on the last slide, if you have other questions about the process or want to sit down, you can reach out to Amber Miller at the DDA. Her email address is there. There's also a lot more information on the peoplefriendlystreets.org website about these projects and the other recent DDA street projects as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we can take a look at our chat and see if there's some questions that are starting to come in. So if you're listening and participating through Zoom, you should be able to type any questions that you have into the chat window, and we will read those off, and we can have our team on hand to help answer them. I see a note from one of the facilitators too that folks are able to unmute and start video too. So if people are having issues chatting, we can also call out your name and happy to unmute you and you can ask a question.
Right, looks like we have a comment from Roger.
Yeah.
Feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I sent a chat and I don't know if that came through or not, but obviously the goal is to reduce the MTs, which means reducing cars coming into downtown. But with over 80,000 commuters coming into Ann Arbor every day, they're not all going to be able to ride bicycles. But I don't see any discussion of dedicated bus right-of-ways into the downtown, into or through the downtown, which can bring in dramatically many more people that are going to be able to come in on bicycles. And with the cost of living in Ann Arbor, a significant amount of the workforce is never going to be able to afford to live in the city, no matter how much affordable housing you build. So I'm disappointed that there hasn't seemed to be any discussion about dedicated right-of-ways for buses to make that form of transportation more attractive.
Great, thank you, Roger. Ian, do you want to share any thoughts you maybe have on that kind of bigger picture regional question?
I think Roger brought up some really good points there. And especially when you're trying to do transit from the suburbs where it's pretty low density and hard to concentrate. So sometimes you may have to do a park and ride type thing. So people go a certain distance and then transfer to a bus. But we always say that progress is made on the margins. And so maybe some people would ride, so maybe a couple of percent. Other people, again, it could be smaller percentages at the beginning and then growing, could move into town. Other things, if we could get a job housing balance better in the outskirts too, that people don't have to come downtown. I think a lot of people in the future will be telecommuting because we've all experienced, a lot of us have experienced that with the pandemic. So, you know, that 80,000 can be reduced dramatically for that. But I think he's got a very good point that if there is a concentration of transit in some corridor, that should be thought of. And I wouldn't see why it wouldn't be on the table. So thanks for that. It's just that there's just not one silver bullet. There's a whole menu of things that you'd want to do to help that sort of tidal flow coming in the morning and then back out in the afternoon. Oh, the other thing too, I forgot to mention is, you know, there could be a lot of sort of transportation demand management where, you know, from car share to like shared minivans and that kind of thing that you could use, or flexible hours. You know, if there's large institutions, instead of everyone coming at the same time and going back at the same time, they could meter themselves out, you know, over time. So I think there's a whole spectrum of things that are covered by the policies that we've looked at that could help contribute to that that pretty big hairy problem of commuters coming in and out during peak hours.
This is Bob Doyle from Smith Group. In response to Roger's question, one of the downtown streets that we're looking at improving is South 4th Avenue, specifically with the eye towards improving the ability of the street to act as a transit center and anticipate greater demand for service and the need for space to provide that service. And then looking at how that connects up to, you know, through 4th and 5th Avenue, connects to Huron. And I can't speak for what's going on in the greater community beyond what our study area is within the DDA, but I'm sure there's some consideration being given in the larger transportation master plan for that specific issue.
Thanks, Bob. We have another comment in the chat box asking if there will be another opportunity to provide feedback outside of the planned sessions before Thursday.
Yeah, I think so. There's those 2 sessions tomorrow on Wednesday that are kind of open to the public and drop in. And then, if you are, kind of a stakeholder downtown and you think you need to have a more in-depth or deeper conversation with the team, I think our approach for that is if you reach out to Amber Miller at the DDA, she can help talk through and understand, what your needs might be. And we have times where we can set aside times to meet with key stakeholders as well outside of those scheduled meetings. So.
And this is Maura. I also just want to add, once we get the presentations up on the People Friendly Streets website, we're also going to be working on having a tool on that site where you can provide feedback. So hopefully by next week, we'll have that up and running.
Thanks, Maura. Okay, we have another comment in the chat box asking if there's been a discussion about the relationship to the Division Street Bikeway and improvements and the community commons development on the library block.
Yeah, to that question specifically, no. I think since it's been raised here, I think that's definitely something that in our conversations, in our breakout sessions tomorrow in particular, looking at Division Street, that would be a good one to understand. There is a broader city staff group, including the transportation staff at the city, as well as the city's public engagement coordinator. And I know that she's helping to manage the City Commons project. So I think maybe that's something that we can look into getting a handle on how that would interface with the division project. So thanks for bringing that up.
Great. Looks like we're at a pause on some comments in the chat box, but we'll give folks another few minutes if you'd like to add anything else.
If nobody has any questions, does anybody have any sort of thoughts on the overall direction of, inclusivity, sort of the equity, the environmental responsibility sort of thing? Like, I'm personally very happy that the city's doing this and showing a kind of a leadership role in these areas. I think it'll create a more competitive city over time. Does anybody have any sort of qualitative ideas about what's going on instead of anything specific? Any specific questions? And by the way, I don't know if I'll ever explain this at the beginning, but if no one says anything in one of these collaborative efforts, it means you agree with everything we've said so far. So that's how we'll interpret it.
Yeah. One question came into, will slides from the presentation be provided on the website? Yes, we can get those, and then also this session will be recorded too. So we'll have an actual video recording of the presentation and the discussion afterwards that'll be posted on the website. So if you know somebody that couldn't make it to this presentation or any of the other ones that are coming up, that those will be available later as well. All right. Well, Maura, do you want to close us out tonight?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your participation. And again, we hope we see some of you tomorrow at some of the breakout sessions for our workshops. But if not, you know how to reach us. We are always interested to hear from you. So please feel free to reach out anytime, and please go outside and enjoy this beautiful early evening. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.